And welcome everyone to our SIP's last monthly workshop of 2019. Who can believe that, right? Today I'm thrilled that our guest speaker is going to talk to us about advisory committees, pros, cons, what do they do, how do you work with one? And Lynne is a veteran fundraiser who has worked in healthcare, in cultural organizations, for years, and she has a CFRE, which I personally am quite jealous and impressed by. All the flutters, and I don't have one. So, without any and just a word about Sanford for those, some of you are regulars who have seen me every month, and some of you are new. So I just want to let you know that I'm Angela Beard. I'm the director of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy here at City University, and SIP, what we affectionately call SIP, is the brainchild of Denny Sanford at our national university mothership, if you will. And Denny wanted to create support in the nonprofit sector for fundraising, so he opened up several institutes all over the U.S., several Sanford Institutes of Philanthropy. We are the Seattle one, and our mission is to support the nonprofit sector and help them achieve greater impact by offering free and low-cost fundraising training to professionals in the field. So at the end of this, we'll have our contact information if you're interested in knowing more. Please feel free. The only time you'll ever hear from us is to offer the free training. So without further ado, I want to welcome Lynne Conrad Marvet to our December workshop.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. I'm really excited to be here and very hopeful that this presentation will be interesting and of benefit to you. So you can see the title, Advisory Committees, Are They Worth the Time and Effort? And I have to tell you, last night when I was rehearsing this, I actually laughed out loud when I read that out loud because it sounds like a funny question, but it's a legitimate question because they are a lot of time and effort. So my answer to the question is yes, they are, if you have the time and resources to be effective. So most advisory committees are very time consuming and they provide a terrific opportunity for new connections for your organization. My experience is primarily related to my work that I did for the Museum of History and Industry, where I was the Director of Development. And working with the committees was actually a lot of fun. And I'll say more about that as we go along, but it's good to know that you can have fun in fundraising. And then also, many years ago when I was working in New York City, I worked with some committees that were very influential and high-powered people connected with Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center. And we did what I call mega fundraising events. So one of them, as an example, was an international antique dealer show with different tiered levels of parties and lots of great stuff to see and do. And then another really big one, this is really taking me down memory lane, was a benefit at Lincoln Center for Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center, which was a tribute to the music of Alan J. Lerner, of Lerner and Lowe fame, and it had celebrities like Julie Andrews and Leonard Bernstein, among others. So it was this huge black tie event with lots of powerful people, and it was a fun experience also. So my goals for this session, for all of you, is to give you a basic overview of my experience with advisory committees and to discuss what's really involved in being successful at it. And I'm already giving you some hints. So it would be, in my opinion, communication is important, collaboration, there's hard work, and there's a lot of planning that goes into it. And hopefully I'll be giving you some ideas to benefit your fundraising and relationship building efforts. So I think basically there are two buckets for the types of advisory committees. One is the time limited and the other is ongoing. So for the time limited, these are just some examples. There could be more, but they could be project or outcome based. Museum exhibits, which is primarily my experience. although I do have a lot of experience with event planning as well, and advisory committees are pretty common for galas or auctions and other types of events. And of course, another kind of well-known type of advisory committee is related to capital campaigns or specific campaigns and even special appeals in some cases. And then the ongoing types are, and you're familiar with this terminology too, would be honorary advisory committees or lifetime members. Museums often do that, and educational institutions as well. Community and industry VIPs, so depending on what the mission of the nonprofit is and what kind of programs or projects you do, there could be a reason to have some community leaders advising you, or celebrity VIPs, because it adds that wow factor, I think, for people. And then alumni trustees, certainly at MOHAI we had a group that was a bit of an advisory group, but it was mainly a method to keep them engaged and well informed of the current activities of the museum, and emeritus trustees as well. So I wanted to start with telling you about the types of committees that I worked with when I was at MOHAI. And one that I wanted to talk about first is the special campaign that we did earlier this year, to honor the executive director, Leonard Garfield. And that was called the Leonard Garfield Legacy Fund. And then the exhibits that I'm going to talk about primarily are the first three: Edible City, A Delicious Journey, which was about the history of food in Seattle, totally fun, and that was in 2016 and 2017. Seattle on the Spot, the photographs of Al Smith. Hopefully you got to see the show, but if you're not familiar with it, Al Smith was an African American who grew up in the Central District here in Seattle and was an amazing photographer. So that was an exceptional exhibit, and I'll get to those details later. And then the fashion exhibit that closed recently in October, and that was the Seattle Style Fashion and Function exhibit. And then finally, there's an exhibit now that is at MOHAI that is actually a Smithsonian Institution traveling exhibit, and it's about Asian Indian Americans, and the title of the exhibit is called Beyond Bollywood: How Indian Americans Shaped the Nation. And I'm not going to say too much about that because I wasn't so much involved in that, but I'll say a little bit in terms of diverse audiences and so forth. So this is a quick and easy example of an advisory committee, and this is the Leonard Garfield, who is the executive director of MOHAI, Legacy Campaign. And the idea for this little campaign was thought up by one of our trustees, who happened to be a major donor as well. And he came up with this idea. I think this is kind of interesting, fun fact, while he was sitting at our gala. So he was having a good time. He was feeling grateful for the mission and accomplishments of MOHAI. And he knew that Leonard's 20th anniversary of being executive director was coming up. And so he talks to one of his buddies, who's a former trustee, sitting next to him. He says, what do you think about this idea to do a special campaign to raise money in Leonard's honor? And the guy says, it's a great idea. And so he immediately asks him to match his donation of $5,000. Now, as development professionals, you may be alarmed to know that I didn't know anything about this until later. But fortunately, he wasn't going to transform the gala into a campaign for this. But I think it's just kind of fun to know how the idea originated. And the other key thing about this special campaign is that it was to be kept a secret from Leonard. And that was going to be a big challenge, I knew, for all of us. And at the time, this was in November, we really only had about 5 months to get it organized and make it happen. And the initial goal was $100,000. And the first meeting didn't happen until January because, of course, after the gala, we had all the gala follow-up. And then we had the year-end giving campaign. So I didn't want to mess with any of that. So by January, it's like, okay, we can start talking about this. And so I think it's important to mention who was on that committee. It was a small group of people, total of 9 people, 5 trustees and 4 senior staff. So we only met in person a couple of times. The first one was at the trustees' home, where we just sort of brainstormed and talked about, how are we going to make it happen, and agreed on the goal and who was going to be involved. And then so the other members of the committee were the current board president, the immediate past president, and 2 vice presidents of the board. And then we had the chief operating officer, who's also the chief financial officer, and the director of marketing and communications, myself, and then the executive assistant to the executive director. So it was my job, of course, since it was a fundraising campaign, to draft the case for support. I worked in collaboration with the director of marketing and communications and the graphics department at MOHAI. So we had a nice little pretty one-pager and, of course, a nice giving response device, how much to give and when and so forth. And then it was pretty easy to identify who the prospects were going to be, because the good news is Leonard is really beloved by the community and remains connected to a lot of past donors and current donors, of course, as well as past trustees. So it was easy to pull those lists of who we wanted to solicit, and I got to review that and say yay or nay about there could be a reason that we wouldn't want to ask somebody. But for the most part, it was like, this is such a unique opportunity, and I see there might be a question.
Well, I do have a question.
Yes.
In fact, it was in the back of my mind, and I'm going to assume it was because of time, but did you consider adding community members to this committee to broaden, and there's secrecy too?
Yes.
Because knowing Leonard myself, and I know you know this,
yes,
you could have gotten, people from all over King County.
Right.
And I know you thought of that, so I'd love to hear why it didn't go that way.
Right. So I want to make sure everybody heard the question. So it's basically about why didn't we expand the committee to larger members from the community, to many more members of the community. And I would say, for simplicity's sake, is really the answer.
Well, in 4 months, right?
So time limited. And actually, what the best answer to your question is, perhaps. I mean, time limited was the main thing, and bandwidth for all of us to get this done. But it was also the fact that this was going to be the private phase. And then in April at this lecture, when we announced it, we would go public with it, and so hopefully be able to reach more individuals. And I see we have another question.
Yeah, just a brief thing. Somebody asked us what DOD stands for.
Oh, sorry, Director of Development. Yeah, Director of Development, and DMC is it has many acronyms. It means other things, but here it means Director of Marketing and Communications. So basically what we did was assign people on the committee to prospects and just get started on it. So it was really primarily an email campaign. There were probably a couple of situations where somebody wanted something mailed to them, but for the most part it was pretty easy to draft an email message that was compelling, that could be personalized by the committee members, and then get those asks out, doing a PDF attachment of the case for support, as well as the response device, my name with the contact person for any questions about how to give and anything else. And it actually was a beautiful example because of the simplicity of it. And I guess that's actually my next slide. But I wanted to say the work of the development team was primarily to identify the prospects, assign the solicitors, monitor the progress. So I had to keep everybody posted on who was giving, report back to all of the committee members, and then of course organize thank you calls and emails and so forth. So I took this picture the night of, and this is Leonard looking completely surprised. Leonard is on the left, and our board president, Chad Richardson, is giving them news about what happened, and you can I see that Leonard also has a bottle of champagne in his hand that we gave him to celebrate. So I told you before that our goal was 100,000. We actually raised 242,000 as the executive director, and we had a deadline. We knew that we wanted to announce this at the annual Denny lecture that happens usually in March or April, and that, you know, people adore Leonard, as I said before. And then we had trustees involved in the asking, will you join me at $5,000, or, you know, will you join me at the level that is appropriate for you? And the amazing thing is that we kept it secret. That was really, really amazing. I didn't think we could do it, but we did. So I just wanted to do a screenshot of the Museum of History and Industry because it's such a beautiful building here in Seattle. And that I am, the next things, well, that was all about MOHAI too, but the next things are also about MOHAI. So I think there are a few things that you want to consider. You need to clarify and very clearly articulate what you want from the committee. And that could be professional advice. It could be program suggestions, both for kids and adults, depending on the mission of your organization. We have another question, I see.
Yes, somebody just asked us, they say, was the 242K raised before this announcement, as it basically was a private fundraising campaign, or are there some private asks before the trustees and then a public asking?
The 242 was all the private part of the campaign, and they were pledges and donations received. And then the day or the day after, I'm sure it was the day after, a few days after Leonard knew, then an e-blast went out to members and anybody on our list to let them know that this was a campaign and encouraging them to donate. So I hope I answered the question.
Cool.
Okay. So let's see. Yeah, obviously fundraising and potential sponsorships, also in-kind support, introduction to networks of people who are on the committee, cross-promotional opportunities and marketing. And I know that was a lot of information in that bullet point, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more as we go through examples. So at MOHAI, what we did for, and these are for the exhibits, special exhibits, most of them created by MOHAI. And the committee members were identified by the leadership team at MOHAI and the curator or curators of the special exhibit. So we vetted the list and made an agreement about who was going to be invited. And then they were invited by the executive director, sometimes in collaboration with the curator. So my point in that, in case you didn't get it, was who does the ask is important. And it's also helpful, of course, if it's a peer-to-peer kind of ask. And then in the letter or the email, we would state specifically what the purpose of the advisory committee would be, how many meetings they would be asked to attend, what the dates would be of those meetings, and I think some of them may have been approximate, so we had already had the first meeting date set, and then we would say our plan is to do, you know, every few months, but it was not a lot of back-to-back meetings. The call to action. So the immediate call to action when you received this invitation to join the committee would be, tell us if you accept or not, right? Because we want to add your name to this list, and I'm going to get to that later. But we said, you know, if you can respond by this date about whether or not you can join, that would be super helpful. So in order to be effective in running an advisory committee, I think you need to be clear about what the scope of the project is. So in this case, the project is the advisory committee, and the scope would be things like the goals, the deliverables, tasks, costs, and deadlines. So the goal in this case, or goals in this case, were to engage community and industry leaders in supporting and promoting a particular exhibit or programs related to the exhibit, and help to establish closer relationships to the museum. So whenever you're getting somebody outside of the staff and the usual circles of influence at the museum, you're hoping to broaden that reach of like, who's going to know about this? Why should they know about it? Who would be interested to know about that sort of thing. And then the deliverables primarily were, from our perspective, of course, to secure sponsorships and in-kind donations. And also, we had some very, very successful promotional activities that some of the businesses were able to help us with, both promotion and marketing. And then attract new audience members, always, because the museum wants to attract new people. Yes?
Okay, so this question goes back a little bit to the previous topic, but someone
That's
asks,
okay.
from the public announcement to how much was raised, for my nonprofit, I don't have famous or influential people. Our advisors wouldn't be able to leverage such a wealthy community base. Thus, we would probably be lopsided in the amount of actual fundraising on the public side. So assume that an advisory committee is comprised of such people.
That is a great question. Primarily the question is about, does an advisory committee need to consist of people who are well known in the community and or have the resources to make major gifts? And I would say actually the answer to that is no. It depends on the purpose of your committee. And one of my concerns about giving these examples is they're kind of like, they're home run examples, right? Because fundraising works the best when you have the right people with the resources, with the interest in the mission, who want to support you. But I think it really can be tailored to any organization, any nonprofit, and should be, But again, you have to be clear about what are you trying to accomplish and how realistic is it. So I think that would be my main takeaway for everybody, is to say you really need to think carefully about whether or not the time and effort that goes into this type of work is going to yield the results that your specific organization wants. So I hope that was helpful. And then the rest of the scope of the project consists of tasks and costs. So the tasks would be what we're asking the committee members to do in terms of attend meetings or send representatives. If they couldn't personally attend a meeting, we had some of that happen. Offer advice and introductions, promote the exhibit, and attend an opening event or two. And then the costs. We sometimes don't think that there would be any costs associated with an advisory committee. Depends on the committee, depends on the group of people and their expectations, and how much you want to sort of cultivate them, right? So you're basically, it's not different from getting to know someone who's a new donor for your organization. So you want to offer them snacks, you want to offer them coffee and juices or whatever. In some cases, we actually offered lunch because that was for Edible City, because it was about food, so we felt like it would be nice to do that, but we only did that once. And then the committee members received a complimentary copy of the exhibit catalog, which is like an incredible gift to receive, and some passes to the museum. So in general, that was kind of our agreement, and that, of course, needs to be agreed upon ahead of time because of the costs associated with it. But I just thought it was important to point that out. And then deadlines. Of course, you have to have deadlines, and you need to allow plenty of time for planning, really advanced planning, and meeting scheduling, and of course, as I said before, how much time is it going to take from the point when you invite people to join the committee to the first committee meeting, knowing that busy people travel and they have other obligations. And it's important to have a strong driver of the deadline communication. So the other thing that I think is really important in all of this is the next topic, staff engagement. It's important to have one person within your organization who is the lead for all of the communications. As you can imagine, it could get complicated depending on the size of your organization. But at the museum, we had a variety of departments who wanted to have conversations with the committee members. So it's important that there's one primary person, and then to make sure that communication came back around as separate conversations were happening. It's important to have a time commitment ahead of the launch of the advisory committee. so that staff understand how time-consuming it could potentially be. Will certain staff members be attending meetings? Definitely. And how much will they be involved in follow-up with committee members? I think that in terms of planning one's schedule, it's also important it's hard to put a number on how many hours and how many days of the week, but you need to let your supervisor know that I'm going to be spending, or get permission from your supervisor, I'm going to be spending time on this, and these are going to be the busiest times. So I'm a big fan of transparency and good communication about, if we're going to do this, it's going to take a commitment, and you need to be clear about how that will affect the rest of your work. Excuse me. And then, of course, there are all the preparations for a good meeting, like the agendas, reminder emails, handouts, PowerPoints, and meeting notes afterwards. So I had an incredibly talented and hardworking corporate and foundation relations manager who ran these meetings from the back seat, so to speak, because she's very humble, but really smart and really talented. Say her name because she deserves that. Amy Zarlingo, who now is at Pacific Science Center. And she was just incredible because she had the passion, she had the know-how, and she would be in the meeting taking notes. I have a hard time doing that and paying attention and talking at the same time. But it's nice to have at least some documentation of what happened, particularly so that can be shared with people who maybe couldn't make the meeting. So a lot of this is just kind of, everyone knows this, but it's good to, I think it's good to sort of articulate how much can be involved in the process. And again, it really goes back to clear communication, in my opinion. At MOHAI, we usually didn't have more than 3 or 4 committee meetings for an advisory committee, and again, these are related to exhibits and the timing of the opening of the exhibit. And they were usually about an hour and a half long, so it's not that short amount of time. But to our amazement, the committee members loved it. You know, they loved like being in the know and sort of knowing about things before they were going to happen. And then I think I maybe said this in one of these bullet points it was a great networking opportunity for all of them to be with their peers. And again, as I said, what's in it for them? They would be, everyone likes to be asked for advice, right? And that's usually, generally in fundraising, as I'm sure you know, one of the best ways to cultivate someone. You're not going to go right out of the gate and ask them for money. You're going to say, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? So this is a true benefit of an advisory committee, is being able to get input and make them feel good about their participation. And then hopefully also there's some prestige associated for the members to be affiliated with this particular exhibit. We did post their names in the gallery once the show opened, as well as on the website. Yeah. Okay. I think it's also important to know what the committee is not, so be clear. At MOHAI, it was important that the advisory committee members knew that they were not designing the exhibit. They might have subject matter expert opinions or suggestions, but ultimately the decision to what the exhibit would look like and the content and layout and all of that is left to the professionals at the museum, and that would be the curators and the leadership of the museum. But that can be a delicate dance, and as you can imagine, some prides and egos have had the potential to be bruised. But it's really, for the integrity of the exhibit, it's important. I felt it was important that I say that because, yeah, it's a slippery slope to go down. The other way is a slippery slope. So what's the return on investment here? Well, the meetings resulted in the meetings with the advisory committee and then one-on-one meetings with individual members of the committee resulted in sponsorships. They resulted in speakers for educational programs, in-kind donations for our auctions. One of the most incredible things, and I'm not going to call this person out because I think that would be unfair, but for Edible City, a well-known foodie in Seattle completely underwrote the catering for our VIP opening preview event. And we said afterwards, we were like, okay, this person has ruined it for us because we can never do such a great job. We can never afford to do such a great job. But that was unexpected and incredibly philanthropic and fun, right? We also got some artifacts donated as a result, so you don't really think about that as something that could be a benefit. But again, this is very specific to a museum, but that was nice because it helped build our collection in relationship to the exhibits. Lots of cross-promotional opportunities and marketing connections were a result of these meetings, and the possibility of recruiting new trustees. I didn't see that come to fruition while I was at MOHAI, but I think that's a great way to think about advisory committees because you're getting people to know you, you're getting closer, and you can usually have a sense of whether or not someone might want to take that next step. So now I'm just going to go through a few specifics about the specific exhibits. So this one was called Edible City, A Delicious Journey. It was from November 2016 to September 2017. This may be hard for you to see, but I'm not going to read the entire list of names of the Exhibit Advisory Committee, but it really is a veritable who's who in the world of Seattle food. And I'm just going to call out a few of the names and give you some examples of how they worked with MOHAI on this exhibit. So the Batali family, the parents of Mario Batali, the famous chef, were able to get from Mario a video of him learning how to make ravioli from his grandmother. And that was in the exhibit. So that video was shown in the exhibit, and that's golden, so special. Kurt Beecher Dameyer of Beecher Cheese was also another, I know, who doesn't love Beecher Cheese? Also incredibly generous in terms of in-kind donations of cheese. He also donated, maybe I shouldn't say the specifics, but he donated a very generous package for our gala, and part of the package for our gala. And also, if you don't know, this is a nice plug for his great work. He established something called Pure Food Kids Foundation to teach kids about eating healthy, and we were able to have one of those programs as an educational program for kids at the museum. Let me see what other examples I wanted to call out, because there's so many great names on this list. Bob Donegan was one of our, I think it was the members preview for the exhibit. He told stories. He's a great storyteller, and so he made it a very lively experience for the members only preview. And Matt Galvin of Pagliacci Pizza, I wanted to call that one out because this was a unique marketing and communication angle. So I'm a fan of Pagliacci's Pizza. I get their newsletter in the mail. So I think they actually did two things now that I'm thinking about it. I think they did some kind of a promo on their boxes, and then they had an article about the exhibit in their monthly newsletter. So that was cool. So lots of great opportunities from this list. Wonderful people to get to know. The other thing that I didn't say previously that I meant to was that we also usually had at least one or two trustees from MOHAI serve on this committee to also get to know them and be well educated about it. This is just a couple of screenshots of who the sponsors were. So we had Oxbow, we had some of the usual state and city support, PCC Natural Markets. We got a grant from the Julia Child Foundation because if you don't know this story, and I hope I don't get it wrong, she visited Seattle, a long time ago, and learned how to keep fish fresh. Don't ask me how because I don't remember the details. But she learned that at Pike Place Market. And so there's some sort of famous story that we had at the exhibit, so we got some support from Julia Child Foundation. Owajamaya is another sponsor, and All Recipes. And then for media support, we have the Times, KUOW, and KCPS. And then Visit Seattle was also one of our media sponsors. The month of April in 2017 was designated as Edible City Month, and a lot of the businesses did special promotions, discounts. Some people even named items after MOHAI on their menu. So this was another way for us to encourage those industries as well as for them to promote the exhibit. And then this is just an example. I won't read all of this, but this was just one of many of our public programs, so you get a feel of the flavor of how beneficial this committee was. A name that I didn't say that I should is Rebecca Den, who was the curator of Edible City, and she's well known to anybody who's interested in food. And so she was the moderator of this particular public program that included Ethan Stoll, Christy Brown, That Brown Girl Cooks, Jill Leitner, Mark Music, and Jean Nakayama. And then I put a URL on there, so this particular program was recorded, so you can actually watch it. But there were a number of things like this where we were able to draw on those committee members to share their expertise with our members and museum goers. So I mentioned Seattle on the Spot before, and this one was just an amazing exhibit of historical photographs, and many of them lots of people in Seattle had never seen before, so it was really fun. And he had an exquisite eye. This particular exhibit was November 2017 to June 2018. Very different kind of committee for this. This one, very community-based, much smaller group, a lot of great community leaders on the list, and as well as a jazz historian, Paul DeBarros, Norm Rice, the Honorable Norm Rice, former mayor of Seattle, to name a few, and then the members of the Smith family. So Butch Smith, the son of Al Smith, was very involved in this and actually had been a volunteer at MOHAI for a number of years before this exhibit even came to life. And then the other important thing I should say about this exhibit was that a number of years prior to the mounting of this exhibit, the Smith family donated the entire collection of his photographs to MOHAI. So that was also a very nice question.
This isn't meant to be disrespectful as it may sound.
Okay.
But what was the purpose in having family members on the committee?
Sure.
Since you already have the collection.
That's a great
Right?
question. Yeah, so the question was about what was the purpose of having family members on the committee? It's a great question, because that could also be dicey, right? You could see that I could go really well, or it could be uncomfortable at times. Butch Smith had been a volunteer for the museum in our archives for many years, so we already had a really good relationship with him, and I think if that had not been already established, it might be more tricky. But he worked in his father's photography studio. He knew the family stories, and so it was actually a very nice, warm and friendly kind of relationship. It was a great question. Another question.
So that creates a really nice connection to the family.
Yes.
Butch Smith.
Yeah.
But in general, for this committee and the other committee, how long did it take to kind of cultivate all those relationships before you actually started meeting for however long it was that you met?
Yeah. Well, so I think this question is about how long does it take to get to know these people before you ask them to join the committee. And that is a great question, because in my mind that question alone underscores time, right? It takes time. So if I look at the names on this particular list, we already had relationships with almost every name on that list. And that, I think, a lot of that is attributed to the Smith family's connection to MOHAI, which was longstanding, and the Black Heritage Society actually has an office in the MOHAI archives in Georgetown. So, you know, that it's that 6 degrees of separation sometimes. So we were very fortunate that we already had a lot of these relationships. But and with the food industry, again, I think it was kind of because of Rebecca Den as the curator. She knew all of these people already. So, but it's not always going to be like that. It's a great question. Another screenshot of who supported this. Actually, I want to call out Leonard Norton because this was a nice connection. We already had a nice, strong connection with Leonard Norton, but they like to underwrite the preview parties, the VIP preview parties, because that's sort of they get to mix and mingle with some of their clients, perhaps bring some of their clients and so forth. So that was a win-win. And then another nice one I wanted to call out in this particular example is Gordon and Cecilia Bowker, who happened to be personal friends of Butch Smith. Butch and Gordon went to O'Day together in Seattle. And so that was like, that never would have happened otherwise. And so that was just a nice personal connection that they had. And they wanted to support it to honor the Smith family. Right. Now, fashion, function. This exhibit closed in October. I just wanted to show very few examples of this amazing exhibit. So we have a House of Schiaparelli ball gown, which is one of many beautiful artifacts in the exhibit. An Eddie Bauer jacket. This is the original Eddie Bauer jacket that was created in 1936. It has a great story. We don't really have time for all that. But it was, I'll say this much, it was created by Eddie Bauer himself because he almost froze to death when he was on a hiking expedition. And he needed to figure out a better way, besides wet wool, to stay warm on his hiking. And then this I just put, the last one example I put is called an Automata scarf by Knit Knack here in Seattle. This design is made by a special weaving machine that was created by the founder of Knit Knack, and it's all binary code stuff. So it's like geeky Seattle clothing and scarves and things. So this exhibit, spanned not the whole of Seattle's history, but a large swath of Seattle fashion and culture. The exhibit support, we were lucky, and this happened in two ways. We were lucky to get Nordstrom to be the main primary presenting sponsor, and that came about in two ways. One was we were able to secure a board member prior to this exhibit from Nordstrom, who could introduce us to all the right people. And the other thing was just that we had some previous connections with the Nordstrom family. I won't name names, but in particular, some generous donors who had donated MOHAI before we even moved to South Lake Union. You can see Eddie Bauer's on this list. We have Leonard Norton again, horticulture. Yeah, and some of the usual suspects in terms of institutional funding. This was another big committee, similar to Edible City, and again, kind of a who's who of fashion and design representatives in Seattle. So we had folks from Mario's, Eddie Bauer, UW, as well as WSU. We had Andrew Hogue of Seattle Magazine, if you're familiar with his work. Filson is also a great example of a business that started in Seattle, very much connected to the function side of the exhibit. Some other names I wanted to call out are Devorah Linder of Prairie Underground. She was very involved. Not to say that the names that I'm calling out were the most involved, but I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the names. And, Raj and Akhil Shah of Shah Safari. That was a really nice connection for us to have their participation. And we were able to get a shirt from them, one or two, that were displayed in the exhibit itself. Oh, and yes, question.
Well, you have a
Yeah.
lovely and impressive committee here, and I'm trying to go through the thought processes that you did in your planning to say, okay, we need this, this, and this. Did you know what you would need? Did you know you'd need connections or artifacts? Or did you
Yes.
just know that these were big names in fashion and you wanted them on the committee and would see how it falls out?
Yeah, great question. Basically, the question was, did we know what we were going to need in terms of connections and artifacts, or how do we go about determining who to ask to join the committee? And again, I need to call out the curator of the exhibit, Clara Berg, who has worked at MOHAI for a long time and is has her degree in fashion. So she already knew a lot of the right people, and then I think it was kind of a collective brainstorming in terms of leadership team of the museum, but really driven by the curator. Yeah. But I think both with this exhibit and particularly with Edible City, we were so lucky to get, when we also got videos of people and businesses and activities for both of those exhibits, but also to be able to get either artifacts that were loaned for this purpose or given to the museum. And then I wanted to call this out. If you saw the exhibit, you know that the beautiful butterfly dress created by Lily Young was in the exhibit, her signature dress, which was very cool. But this is a screenshot of the catalog for the exhibit, and we were able to get her to write the foreword for the book. So that's another, like, who knew that was going to happen? So that was another really strong image. And then finally, the Beyond Bollywood, Indian Americans Shape the Nation, as I said before. This is an exhibit that's on display now at MOHAI and is a Smithsonian traveling exhibit. I do know that MOHAI included a local component, and so here's the exhibit advisory committee that was put together for that purpose. So this is a nice mix of folks, both from universities as well as a couple of trustees, former trustee, a Boeing retiree. Yeah, I'm not sure if people know many of these names. You may be familiar, hopefully, with Kashmir, who does a wonderful film festival related to Indian culture in Southeast Asia. So Rita was a real driver for a lot of the programs. They're still having some programs upcoming. And then we also were able to involve Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal in her office in this. So we didn't talk about politics at all, and we don't need to go into any detail, but it's always nice to have, friends in political places. And a result, actually, it wasn't her office, but it was another committee member. Oh, it was Devadatta Dash, who's with the Washington State Indian Trade Relations Action Committee, who got us the former U.S. ambassador to India, who's now the Consul General of India in San Francisco, who happened to be passing through town this summer, and we were able to host a reception for him. So the committee was invited and a few other key players. So those kinds of things, like, it's like manna from heaven or something, because we didn't know that was going to be a result of this when we started. And then, again, just wanted to give you a screenshot of who supported this. Crosscut is one of the media sponsors for this particular one, and the Asian Weekly. We did have a representative from Asian Weekly at that ambassador event that I mentioned. So basically, my advice about advisory committees is that you need to be clear about getting organizational buy-in before you proceed. And in my opinion, what's really important is the commitment to cross-departmental communication, because it's sometimes easy to have silos begin to happen. So you really want people to buy into this, to understand why communication is so important. As I said previously, that includes budgets and time commitments from staff. Do your research about who to invite and why you should invite them. Vet that list with people who might be appropriate. We probably had our Board of Trustees look at some of the names and to provide suggestions as well. And then keeping them informed was also important. So as I said, I think it's nice to include either the board president or a representative or two. So I like this this graphic image of, like, you know, really thinking about what is the value of an advisory committee to your organization. That's going to differ according to your organization and your needs. But I think that my general experience, of course, is that yes, they're very worth the time and effort. But you have to have the staff engagement and the people power to communicate well, to organize well, and actually have fun meetings. We did have a lot of fun, and I think you can reap both short-term and long-term benefits. So we've already handled a lot of questions. I also like this image of the yes, no, maybe, because it's like that might be what you're thinking about. Should I do this or not? And that's fine. And I'm happy to take other questions. I do have my contact information and the fabulous picture of me as a child, looking like I'm ready for your questions. And I'd love to talk about effective fundraising. So please don't be shy about following up. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Do you see any value to what I think is the old school advisory committee model, where someone writes a big check and you want to be able to make a phone call if needed, so you put them on an advisory committee?
Was there more to that question? Or?
No.
I'm glad you
more
mentioned
passive than active.
Yeah, no. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I forgot that little tidbit when we were going through the list of types of advisory committees. And the question is about old school advisory committees, where you write a big check and you get your name on that list, which is often posted in the museum, or depending on how much money you give, or in a newsletter or annual report or so forth. When I was reflecting on this and thinking about other jobs where I've been involved with committee members, one of them was when I worked for TheaterWorks USA in New York City. And this is terribly old school, but the letterhead had the board members on the side and then the honorary advisory committee names. And so and that is still a powerful thing. I'm not going to say that it's not, because it gets people's attention. And in the case of TheaterWorks, it was original musical theater for family audiences, young kids and family audiences. We had people like Marlo Thomas and Henry Winkler on that honorary advisory committee list. Did they really do anything for us? Not so much, but people recognize those names. And it can give a kind of cachet or a clout to the efforts of the organization. I'm personally a fan of, if your name's on the list, I want you to be involved in some way. That's just a personal preference of mine. But of course it depends on the organization and what you're trying to achieve. Okay. Sure. Anything else? Or any questions?
We have a comment that says, "This was a great session, thank you."
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It's been super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, sure. We do have time? Oh, we're ahead of time.
Can we offer the slides to?
Yes. I definitely prepared this so that you could take your time with the presentation. And like I said, my contact information is there, my LinkedIn account. So please feel free to reach out. I love to see nonprofits succeed, and I'd like to see committee work be successful and, fun. I can't say enough about how we all need to have fun in our jobs, and really know that the work that we're doing is extremely beneficial. I forgot to say my line on this slide. May all your committees be fruitful and beneficial, but I also want all of your activities to be a source of joy and fulfillment for you. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Oh, no, stay there. I just want to thank you everyone for joining us. This is the last workshop for 2019. So I want to wish you all a very happy holiday season and a prosperous new year. And we'll be up and running in early January in the new year. So thank you, and what's the word I'm trying to say?
Till next time.
Oh, Wiedersehen.